they're fabulous. We've learnt a lot, we're still learning a lot. They are an incredibly diverse, extinct group, and yeah, it's super. But we needed to have a change. It was primarily about this. It was this specimen, Dippy, the Diplodocus, which was donated to us at the start of the end of the 19th, start of the 20th century. It's a cast. It's been a central specimen at the museum for a long time. It became iconic. It became the heart of the museum, the single specimen that people were kind of identifying the museum with, and thought that we were just a dinosaur museum and nothing else. And so when you look back through the archives, you discover this thing sat in the reptiles gallery back at the start of the 20th century, and was actually in the central hall, what we now call the Hinsey Hall. It was only moved in there in 1979, which was a great year for music, I have to say. 1979, and it was positioned next to this Triceratops skeleton, and it looked fantastic. But in people's minds, it had been there forever. People seemed to think that this thing had always been in the central hall, that it was always what the museum had been about. But there was so much that had changed in the museum over the years. So in 1924, that central hall was all about big game animals and associated other things, a really strange mixture. In 1895, there was a whale in the central hall, the sperm whale, this wonderful skeleton, which is actually on display now in the whale hall at the museum. And it came with its own free policeman. Back in the day, when London policemen were happy to stand next to a whale skeleton for the whole day. And not just any policeman, actually, if you look here, it's a sergeant. Can't complain. You wouldn't get that these days. We started to have conversations about 2010 about transforming the Natural History Museum into what we wanted to think of as a natural history museum for the future. We wanted to figure out where we're best placed to add value in a rapidly changing world. We started to evaluate the relationships that we had with our visitors and our stakeholders, and we thought about transforming our permanent galleries to really showcase the science that we do and the diverse nature of our research collections. Two things which generally just weren't appreciated by people. And this was the statement from our director, Michael Dixon. He wanted to have the reimagined Hinsey Hall, that central space, become the gateway to our collections and galleries, the starting point for visitors to engage with the nation's collection, an opportunity for them to orientate themselves, become inspired, and catch a tantalising glimpse of all that the museum has to offer. That was the plan. Very ambitious plan. And so in January 2014, I came back from my holidays and was called into a meeting by our Director of Science, and none of us had any idea. There was a panel of cross-museum people brought together. We had no idea this meeting was going to happen, what the contents of the meeting were likely to be. We were told we have to select a new central specimen. We're going to replace Dippy. And the Director of Science turned to me and said, "Richard," and this is in front of everyone, "Richard, you're going to become known as the Dippy Killer." Okay. The criteria for selecting a new central specimen must be a genuine specimen, not a fossil replica. Must be representative of our collections and our scientific activities. Must allow us to showcase, discuss origins, evolution of species, biodiversity of life on Earth, sustainable futures. And so we were all basically given a vote, and it was a win-win situation as far as I was concerned, because of course I came up with this. It was the first thing that popped into my mind. The blue whale that was already on display in our whale hall. Those of you that have been to the museum at any point in your life before 2017, actually before 2015, if you've gone into our whale hall where we have the life-size model of a blue whale on display and then 4 other huge whale skeletons, the specimen right at the top of the hall was the blue whale. It was hidden. You couldn't really see, you couldn't appreciate it, and it was articulated in a very kind of utilitarian, horizontal, typical sort of late Victorian, early 20th century posture, not telling you anything about the animal, its behaviour, anything at all. So this is the skeleton of a 25-metre long female blue whale, which actually live stranded on the southeast coast of Ireland, Wexford, beautiful place, on the 25th of March 1891. A genuine specimen with a wonderful backstory, a rich backstory. So I had to make a presentation to the directors, the trustees, about why this was the right specimen to select. You all know the story. You know, I don't need to really go through this with you, but the significance of the blue whale and why it was chosen and how it was chosen as a species that us humans would pull back from the brink of extinction. The IWC meeting in London in 1966, the global ban that was placed on hunting blue whales, all about numbers of blue whales, how at the start of the 20th century there were hundreds of thousands. We'd reduced that number to just a few thousand, possibly by the by the 1960s, because of commercial exploitation. Now we know that there have been increases in numbers of blue whales, and we hope, we believe, that the moratorium on whaling is responsible for that in large part. But Hope really I wanted Hope to become a symbol of what we can achieve when we work together across international boundaries, that we can live responsibly, that we can build a sustainable future. I know these sound like grand aims. Hope reminds us, Hope, I just have to say Hope, the whale is called Hope, now it's called Hope. It was a name that was chosen by the museum because of the significance of the word, and because every conversation that we had about the future, about extinction, about recovery, about sustainability, that word just kept appearing, and so it was chosen as the name for the specimen. Some might like it, some might loathe it, but the public have really picked it up and run with it, which is good. But Hope reminds us of the damage that we can cause to the planet, encourages our visitors to think about their role in bringing about changes, stimulates challenging conversations, to create a space where we could actually have challenging conversations, not user-friendly conversations, not conversations that have been signed off by the government, but challenging conversations. That was what we wanted to do. Hope has helped reposition the NHM as a museum looking to the future, not just being seen as a dinosaur museum. This happened not too many weeks ago. You might have heard the news. Extinction Rebellion appeared in London. They protested peacefully, various locations. They appeared at the museum one day. They had a mass die-in. They walked into the museum peacefully, lay down in the Hinty Hall under the blue whale skeleton, and they just lay there. For a couple of hours they lay there. And I like to think that the space, they selected this space because we'd already done part of the work for them. You know, the significance of this specimen, Hope, our blue whale, and what we had put out as our messaging about the museum and how we wanted to discuss issues around extinction and sustainability, that these people have come to the museum to use this space because of the work that we'd already done. I could be wrong, I don't know, but I'd like to think that that was the case. Yeah, this is me as a 10-year-old boy. This is the way I remember myself. I was very thin. I had a huge head. I lived in Birmingham, which is about as far from the sea as you can get in England, and I didn't really know very much about whales and dolphins, hardly anything. But I visited the museum for the first time on a school trip as a 10-year-old, and I remember walking into the central hall of the museum and seeing the dinosaurs and being completely unimpressed. But that was just me. That was just me. It wasn't my thing. I remember walking through to the whale hall and seeing the life-size model of the blue whale and just looking up at the vastness of this thing. And then I started asking questions of the gallery attendants about, you know, are these dinosaurs, are they extinct? They're still alive, they live in our oceans. Looking at the skeletons, I was fascinated by skeletons. As a child, I'd go and collect roadkill, take it home, bury it in the garden. Now I know that if you do that as a child, you're either going to become a curator or a serial killer. That's what I've been told. I chose the curatorial path. I can guarantee that's the only path that I did choose. But you can see the whale hall as it was, with our blue whale skeleton in position and all this other stuff going on around it with no interpretation really to speak of. we began the process of taking down the skeleton of the blue whale in 2015, and we had to work around everything else. Nothing else could be touched, nothing else could be moved. So the scaffolding was very creative, the skeleton was taken down. It took months to take it down. The conservators that we have working in the Natural History Museum had to check every single bone in the skeleton, clean, consolidate, repair, make sure it was safe to go into the central space in Hinsey Hall. The only space that we had to work on the new design for the new pose for the whale in Hinsey Hall was an aircraft hangar we found in Oxfordshire, in Bicester, a long way from London. We had to transport the skeleton off-site to this space. We hired a company, a great company based in Canada called Research Casting International, who make metal frames to support bones for a whole range of different museums. They work for Hollywood, they do all kinds of things, and I was passionate to try and inject as much dynamism into the new pose for this skeleton as possible. I got the opportunity to go into the field and spend time working with John Kalambakidis and the Cascadia Research Collective off Santa Barbara, observing, then tagging these feeding blue whales. And the work that I'd done up to that point, looking at the data that was available, that had been collected from accelerometers, cameras, all kinds of things, the data from the field that showed how these animals actually dive, their acrobatics, their movements. I wanted all of that, as much of that as possible, to be expressed through this new pose, to really showcase the fact that, you know, there's work going on. People like you are out in the field doing this work, bringing these data together, and we wanted to be able to express the kind of the wealth of knowledge that was being collected, and also the amount of work that still needs to be done, the huge amount of work that still needs to be done to try and understand these animals. So, once the construction of the frame and the tweaking had been done in the aircraft hangar, it was moved back to the closed central hall at the museum, and it was installed over the course of about 2 weeks, and it was hoisted into position centimetre by centimetre, and it was a remarkably logistical, fraught, nail-biting 2 weeks, but we